Okay, great. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in to our Zoom town hall about entrepreneurship and startups. Just a note on a Zoom call with this many people, it's good if you're not speaking to keep your microphone muted so we don't get any extra sounds coming in. It makes it easier for everyone to hear. So I'm Eric Clavens. I'm a professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering and an adjunct in bioengineering and computer science and engineering. I've been here at the University of Washington for about 18 years, and I've been the chair for about 14 months ever since COVID started. That was a coincidence, but it happened around the same time. We're really happy that you're all here joining us in this event. We've run these town halls so that we can stay in touch with everyone using this new medium. It's not ideal, but it actually does have some benefits. So for example, people tend to come from all over the world for these kinds of things, whereas they would maybe have had to have been in Seattle to attend one of these. So there are some benefits. We're working on getting everything back into in-person in the fall. Stay tuned. Hopefully you'll hear more about that in the future. But for now, Zoom is what it is, and we're going to take advantage of it. So, I've been involved in a couple of startups, one that completely failed miserably, and one that worked out is working out really well. Lots of other faculty in our department have as well. And what we wanted to do with this is really just kind of highlight a bunch of different aspects of what startups are like in our department and different stages of them. And so we have panelists from a few different walks of life, and we'll introduce them in a minute. And really what our goal is to just kind of show you what the landscape looks like. We'd love to hear your questions. So feel free to type those in the chat, because there are a lot of people. It's maybe not so great if people are using their audio, but we'll see how that goes. But for now, please feel free to type questions in the chat. We hope that, by the end of this, you'll have some ideas of what kind of startups are emerging from our department, and really how maybe you can get involved in startups yourself if you're so interested in that. One of the things I think that's really interesting about our department is that, because it's an engineering department and we engineer things that people use, startups are a really natural thing to come out of an engineering department. And it didn't used to always be the case in an academic setting that startups were a natural outcome, because it was, you have to write papers and be scholarly and do all this stuff, and academics didn't necessarily value that. But at the University of Washington, I think that's really changed. And you can see this entrepreneurial spirit all over the place. I now think of my students as either they're going to go become professors, or they're going to go join startups, or they're going to actually do startups. And that's really one of the greatest outcomes that a student can have, and that's one of the common pathways. Another way that the university is really promoting sort of industry relations and startup thinking and entrepreneurship with our students is through our capstone engineering program. And so we have entrepreneurial course sequences that the students can take. And then we do industry academic joint projects for student capstones. So we're really dedicated and committed to promoting this kind of work in our department, and see it as one of the main outcomes of the research that we do. So that's kind of the preview. What I'd like to do now is introduce our panelists. So once again, we're gonna go around and have each panelist introduce themselves, and we'll go for a few minutes each. And then what I'll do after that is I'll start asking questions. And I have a few questions already ready, but once again, if you type questions into the chat, we can get your question up there as well. And so hopefully you'll be generating much more questions than I've already prepared to get started. So with that, let's see, what order we're going to go in. Let's start with Laura. Do we want to go? Let's start with Laura Dorsey.
Great. My name's Laura Dorsey. I'm an associate director at UW's CoMotion office, and CoMotion is the name of our technology transfer office, and that is the department on campus that deals with the creators of intellectual property who want to commercialize them. I have been on campus for 26 years, the last 16 at CoMotion and the previous 10 at a nonprofit housed in Fluke Hall that funded industry university collaboration. So I've spent a lot of time dealing with the ECE department and really had a lot of fun working with some of the creative people in the department. And I'll explain more about CoMotion later as we go on with the panel.
Great, thank you, Laura. And then Arka Majumdar, would you introduce yourself?
My name is Arkam Majumdar. I'm an associate professor at both electrical and computer engineering. That's my home department, but I'm also affiliated with physics department. I am with my colleague, Professor Carl Boringer. I co-founded a startup called Tunoptix, which is working on very small optical elements with application in machine vision and AR/VR glasses. I am actually a technical advisor there now, and I'm at UW for 6 years right now.
Great, and Claire Watts, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Claire Watts. I'm Vice President of Operations at ThruWave, which is a startup that spun out of the University of Washington. I joined UW as a postdoc, so after getting my PhD in physics, a follow-on research position in 2015, although I grew up 2 miles from UW, so I've been a lifelong Husky fan and community member. So ThruWave makes 3D millimeter wave imaging solutions. So I think we've all had this scenario where we've ordered something tiny online and it shows up in a comically large box. So what ThruWave's technology can do is we can image packages on their way out of the fulfillment center and actually get a 3D image of what's inside the box. And then with our image analytics software, we can automatically divert packages that are not filled efficiently to be repackaged. And that's just one of the things you can use our technology for. So yeah, super excited to be here.
Thanks, Claire. And then Josh, I left you for last because you have a few slides that you wanted to show to introduce yourself.
Great, thank you very much, Eric. So yeah, I'm gonna tell you about 3 startups that have come out of my lab. I am the Milton and Delia Zuccio Professor in Entrepreneurial Excellence in ECE, and I'm also have an appointment in CSE. The startups that I'm going to tell you about are called Jeeva Wireless, WiBotic, and Proprio. So at the top is a picture of the chip that Jeeva just released. We just had a press release about this week, calling it Parsair, and it's a backscatter modem chip, so very low power communication device. It can send about 1 megabit per second over 100 meters, and it's a very small chip, and it uses 200 times less power than BLE. In the bottom, you see 3 of the co-founders who all did their degrees at ECE, so Vamsi Tala, Aaron Parks, and Bryce Kellogg, all alumni of ECE. And then there's WiBotic, picture of Ben Waters, co-founder and CEO, also PhD, UW ECE alum. WiBotic makes wireless charging systems, particularly for robots, so that robots can recharge themselves. And we have some exciting new projects at WiBotic and in conjunction with UW as well, to do wireless charging on the moon and in other sort of difficult space type applications. And you know, WiBotic has a lot of other commercial applications too, but this one is really exciting and fun. The third startup is called Proprio. Co-founder is actually from CSE rather than ECE. This is Jim Youngquist on the right. And this startup is making surgical visualization systems. In fact, I have a little movie of that, but I'll show it later if there's time. So that's all I wanted to tell you about. Thanks.
Great, thank you all. So I guess the idea here is that the technologies I think that are behind all of these startups are absolutely fascinating and fantastic. And I certainly encourage people to ask questions about the specific technologies. But we also wanted to really touch on kind of how does a startup even emerge from the UW and what's the process like? And so maybe starting with Laura, could you describe some of the specific ways that startup companies do emerge from the University of Washington and how the university works with them and how the community works with them and so on?
Yeah, so it all starts with the brilliant minds in departments like the ECE department. And something happens with one of the researchers that causes them to think, huh, maybe somebody will pay money for this, or maybe I'd like to have a startup company, or somebody contacts them from a company and, shows enough interest that they start thinking, maybe there's something more that we might do with this research, then publish a paper and let the results, move out into the world in a free fashion. So one of these interesting thinkers approaches my office and starts asking questions about, can we do this? What does this look like? Often the starting point is around what kind of assets might the university have? And usually that's, software, a potentially patentable method. Sometimes it can be pretty fully developed because they're about to release a paper describing it. Sometimes it's earlier in the process. And we begin having conversations around who would use this, how would they use it, what other resources do we need to help develop this idea to a point that either we're removing risk from a startup opportunity so they have a better chance of succeeding, or removing risk or demonstrating some sort of proof of concept. So an existing commercial company might become interested. And we have a whole variety of different ways we try to help support those teams as they begin figuring out the answers to some of those questions and needing some resources. So we provide we're best known for providing intellectual property protection and management, but we also provide quite a lot of training. I think of it, actually, it was one of Claire's co-founders who had said, learning to work through these business side questions was a lot for him like learning a new language, that he had started in college and went into the engineering track because the country he was educated in, that's what you did. Then he had enough time to do physics. And when he went into physics, he discovered that physics was really a completely different way of thinking from engineering. And then when he started engaging in some of CoMotion's programs, he said, it's like you're learning yet another language, another way of thinking. So I have the privilege of working with these people who are experts already in one domain, and they get to become experts in a business domain, which it can be a steep learning curve. And I will let the others talk about that when it's their turn. It's definitely a different kind of thing. So we've got also training to help the teams begin to learn the methodologies from the business perspective. We have a very robust mentor network that's filled with experienced business people who want to give back. Maybe some of them are looking for opportunities and think this is a way to get an interesting early look at some potentially emerging companies. And then we have some programs to help provide funding for proof of concept. And I noticed a couple people from WRF are on in the call today, and they have very nicely funded some of the work that we manage, as well as do some direct funding themselves. So there's lots of different pieces. It often takes several years or even longer than several years from when somebody approaches us to when the startup leaves the university.
Thank you. And WRF is the Washington Research Foundation. Maybe a good question to follow up on that, or maybe to dig in a little bit deeper, and this would be for our panelists, is can you describe a little bit about how your startup started and what the interactions were with the university and the community that kind of helped it along the way? Josh, you'll just have to pick one of your many startups to describe, but does anyone want to start with that? How
I
about
could
Claire?
start with one that Laura
Okay,
was
gosh.
involved in.
Okay, yeah, start with one that Laura was involved in.
So it sort of started a little bit the way Arka described. We published a paper, it generated a lot of press. Some kind of fancy VCs approached us from California. And, after a lot of talking, Laura was kind of like, why would you take that deal? And, she fortunately kind of steered us away from a deal that was not really very good, even though it was with big name people. So that was an interesting one. So we ended up doing it much more on our own, as opposed to, in some cases, someone else will really, take the IP and do everything, start the company, raise the money, et cetera. We ended up sort of doing it more of a homemade fashion, which I think, I'd say we've learned a lot more by doing it that way.
Yeah, that's interesting. How about Claire? Do you have a
Yeah, so
story of beginnings?
yeah, we very similar to what Laura mentioned, we had a moment with our technology. It was largely funded at the university by the Department of Homeland Security, but we quickly realized that it had huge potential for commercial applications. So Laura brought up a really good point that one of my co-founders, Andreas, he and I were both scientists as our complete background. And so we were able to get kind of some great crash courses in how to operate our technology from a business perspective. So, in addition to kind of that support, we also got financial support through the CoMotion Fellows Program and the GAP funding. And then assistance with getting our Small Business Initiative Research Grant from the National Science Foundation, which is our first real big piece of money that allowed us to expand ThruWave beyond UW.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. And Arka, did you want to respond to that?
Yes, I think, as Josh mentioned, we were also approached by a VC, but in our case, we actually took the deal. And I think then we basically, the VC helped us to get started. So a lot of the business idea the VCs brought in, they actually also put people that who helped kind of figure out what is the customer. We did not really know all those things, and CoMotion was all the time like helpful. And one I was mentioning that CoMotion helped us to also get this deal done. So I'm hopeful the VC did a good deal that Laura did not ask us to not to take it. But yeah, one thing that I found, like the first 3 years, we did not really have done much because I was pretty early in my career. I'm still pretty early. None of my students were graduated. So me and one of my colleague here who co-founded the startup. But once our student graduated and they got into the company, then the company really took off. So the only thing is, like, I think if I have to do the second time, I will have my students really co-found this startup. That's what I think, Josh, you did as well. And then actually we recently got like a lot of funding from the government just thanks to the students. I mean, they wrote very good proposals. We got almost a big $2 million grant from DARPA, which is the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. Actually, I found that Joe Biden also put this acronym. When you say DARPA, they say like, this is the full name. I was pretty surprised. Anyway, yeah, thanks.
I think that's interesting. I should add that the pathway for students and postdocs and research scientists through CoMotion in the university is actually quite well developed. And so I've seen students, for example, apply for grants from CoMotion, and then they get put in front of a panel of startup experts and entrepreneurs and mentors, and they have to give a pitch, and that's sort of where it starts. And there's also, I guess, the Foster School of Business also supports, startup competitions, and there's a variety of ways that students can get involved well. So I think that's important to highlight. I wanted to bring up a question in the chat. So Leah Zhang asks, do intellectual property rights of ECE research all go to the university, or can individuals claim ownership as well? So who wants to tackle that one? Probably a Laura question.
Yeah, I'd love to tackle that one. So in around 1980, there was a federal law passed that's called the Bayh-Dole Act. And what that allowed was a big change. Before that, anytime the federal government funded research at a university, the federal government took ownership of that. And in 1980, this new law said universities could claim ownership in inventions created by its employees using federal money, but there were some conditions around that. And one of the conditions that I think is an important public policy condition is that a portion of the money generated from that intellectual property had to be shared back personally with the inventor. So we're trying to incent the inventor class of people to want to keep inventing. And that if we didn't, as the university, want to exercise rights to that federally funded research, we have to give those rights back to the federal government. So that really forms the basis of why tech transfer exists in most universities. So employees of the university have obligations to the university related to intellectual property, which doesn't mean all intellectual property created on campus belongs to the university, but that created by employees almost always does. So an exception would be undergraduates in a capstone class creating something. The university would not own that intellectual property. So I would say the vast majority of things we see created in ECE, not by undergrads, is probably going to be owned by the university and then licensed out to other entities.
And there is some kind of sharing of the return of that between the university, between CoMotion, the department, and the inventors, right?
That's right. There's an established policy that dictates how that money gets spread out across campus and apportioned to the inventor developer group.
Cool. So another question that was in the chat is, and maybe someone else wants to tackle this one, what's the most common structure for technology to transfer into a startup? Or, what have you seen for the technology transfer? So do you, how does the patent work? How do the copyrights and so on? And is there a portion of equity that goes to the university, and what kinds of percentages are there, and does it dilute? I don't know who wants to tackle that one, or you may not want to give the detailed cap sheet of your company, but you can talk broad strokes.
Yeah, we probably signed an agreement with the university that says we won't spill all the details to that question.
That's right.
That's right, Laura.
I can talk a little bit about a standard startup license, although I don't want to dominate all the talking. We actually have on CoMotion's website a template agreement that gets used and gets changed very little, although as Josh points out, we do keep the financial conditions confidential. One term that's not confidential is a standard financial term in our startup licenses is that the university takes 5% equity with an anti-dilution cap that is matched to the industry that startup is in. And we do that because our startups generally have zero money, and so they don't have money to pay us an upfront fee. So instead of that, we can take equity at that stage. We don't take equity at any other stage because we're not allowed to.
Because of state law, or is that Bayh-Dole? Why? Where's that law?
It's state, and it's because we would be perceived to be speculating with the state's assets money. And when you don't have any money or you have no value, we can take it because it has no value.
Exactly.
That's a relief.
So here's a question for the other panelists. What mistakes, if any, did you make along the way towards getting your startup up and running? And what would you sort of, I don't know, tell a new professor or student or postdoc who wanted to start a company now that you learned along the way, or are in the process of learning along the way?
I can go first. I mean, the first thing will be, don't start a company on your own. Have like your students or postdoc definitely get involved, and they will be really good employer, good like first people when we co-founder, because they know the technology. Like, I mean, the startup that is coming out from ECE is kind of based on certain technology that only few people knows in the whole world. I mean, even though it's in the public paper, doesn't mean that everyone can do it. And secondly, I mean, they are also really motivated. They have the time that most of the faculty don't have. So that's I think the biggest mistake that I made that I will not make. And secondly, we need to focus pretty early on some application rather than like really being see what can happen. And that's the academic mindset we are in, like, oh, let's just try to, something is interesting, let's do that. But here you really have to focus. These are the two things that I found from my experience.
Thanks, Arka. Claire?
Yeah, just echoing a little bit what Arka said, one thing that we, that wasn't so much a mistake, but was a challenge for us was to pick the right market. And we were coming as people who really knew the technology very well, but found that evaluating all these different markets was challenging. And that was actually where CoMotion helped us with some customer discovery. And initially we were focusing on a market that we realized was not going to be good for us. And so then, you know, we were able to pivot. And I think that's a piece of advice I would give anyone starting a company. You know, don't tie yourself too much to anything, even just kind of emotionally. You know, you have to be willing to realize that your technology can be used in a whole bunch of different ways, and to trust that some markets are going to be better than others, and, you know, be willing to pivot your technology in that way.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Josh?
Yeah, well, I guess one thing I've seen, I mean, some ways maybe this is trivial, so everybody knows this, but if a deal seems too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. We had for Jeeva, we had a partner who was going to help us build the chip for no cash or equity or anything. They were just going to share in some of the revenues down the stream. And, you know, that sort of fell apart and, you know, cost us quite a bit of time. And then we had to find, you know, partner that we could give money to get that chip made. And, you know, now we have the chip made, but it took quite a bit of extra time. So I'm not sure how transferable that lesson is, but that's one we learned.
Well, so I have a failed startup and a startup that's working, and the failed one probably, it was too good to be true, and I should have realized it sooner on. So I think it's actually pretty easy to, especially if you don't know much about starting a company, because say you're an academic or a student, to really know what's a good deal, what's a bad deal, what kinds of deals are reasonable that people make. So I think that makes a lot of sense, what you said. Seems like it ought to be obvious, but it probably isn't.
It's obvious now.
Yeah, right. Let me just remind you to please post some questions in the chat. We'd love to hear what kinds of questions you have for our panelists. So the next question that I have is, what challenges did you face either in starting up or scaling and growth? And then how have you addressed these issues? Like, how did you get your first employees? How did you get, you know, employee number 2 and 3? Or how did you get space for your company? How did you, you know, launch your first product if you're there yet? And what were the challenges?
Ken says, like, yeah, we just
I think we're going to do Arka, Claire, Josh. Arka, Claire, Josh. So let's just.
Okay, that's good. Yeah.
So and I guess Laura, you can chime in too if you have stories from other companies you've worked with.
Yeah, we just got a space through CoMotion. So CoMotion actually provides space, and one good thing about that is I think there is no lease. So if it is not doing well, you can stop it. Apparently, that's what our CEO decided. So I think the scaling up thing, one of the thing is money. That's one of the, I think, what we faced, and we were pretty proactive in getting federal money along with the VC money, which helps us to really get things started. And secondly, I think at least our philosophy is right now not to be in the stealth mode and publish a lot, to just show people like, okay, what is possible. So there is some technical challenges as well that I think maybe it's not completely business wise. We're talking to a lot of people getting their requirements and trying to solve it. So there's a lot of technical challenges as well. But I think the money was the biggest issue, and having like different sources really helped us to get the thing going.
Sure, yeah, thanks.
Hey,
Claire?
Professor
Oh,
Eric, this is Gary.
hi, Gary.
Hello. This is Gary Wong.
Hi, Gary, what's your question?
Well, while you're on the subject of a patent, okay, I'm the old man and I've been around for a long time. And I have more than 10 or 12 patents, and I prepare myself, and I have never got anything turned down. And I'm a lucky guy, and I work around for a long time. I have worked for Boeing. I have worked for, retired from Northrop Grumman, used to be TRW. You know that we have a president, is called Ed Dunford. He's the president of the company from UW. We are old timer. I was there 60 years ago. And all my life it's been very, very lucky. And I have just all kind of help and from people and from school and from Dr. Ishimuru. I don't know if you know Dr. Ishimuru. He's 92 now. He's 1 year older than me. I'm 91. So this is a long story. I have a lot of experience in terms of preparing patent and prepare what to do and that kind of thing. So I'm not going to take a lot of time, but if you have more question along that line, I'm not sure. It's your company have your own patent and who's preparing that and who does what. So, but my experience has been very smooth and I had no problems. I have never been rejected in any of my patents.
Great. Well, maybe that's a good question then to go on to next. So
Yeah.
For the panel, what is the, what kind of IP agreements have you come up with? Do you have patents? Did the university help you with those patents? Do you have exclusive licenses? And so on. And even a question here is, does ECE pay for patenting? No, but the university might. What's the patent situation with your company? And maybe Claire, I don't know, Claire, Arka.
I can take it very briefly. So yeah, all our patents are filed through CoMotion, and CoMotion paid for it initially, and then once we have the company and we have money, we paid it back. But that's how it works. But getting this first thing, CoMotion always helped us to file the patent or pay the money essentially.
Yeah, Claire?
Yeah, nothing much more to add. We're in a similar boat. We've pretty much kind of from very early on, we were working with Laura for all our IP needs.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Josh.
The three startups that I mentioned have had the same pattern. We filed something at the UW and then licensed it out. But they have been different in the amount of patents. So, Jeeva, we really had worked at the university for like 5 years, doing a lot of different projects and patenting each one of them. So that company has a very big patent portfolio. Proprio, by contrast, has like 1 or 2 patents at the university. And that's something you see that differs across industries too. So, drugs are obviously very patent oriented. Electrical engineering is more patent oriented than some fields, and software, computer science, sometimes you'll have really great startups that have no patent whatsoever. So it's kind of interesting how that differs across fields.
I think that's good. And Laura, do you want to say something about in sort of in general, like does the university, so there's a question from Ron Faith here, does the university license the technology to the startup on an exclusive basis, or can the university license the technology to other companies as well? And so on. And another one here, and does the UW provide any initials? Oh, I guess that's another question. Yeah, let's go with the patents first.
Yeah, so a typical startup license, the startup wants to have the intellectual property exclusively. And often with a patent, that's really what makes the most sense, is to control the rights. So the most common startup license is exclusive rights. We wouldn't have to license the intellectual property exclusively if the startup didn't feel like they needed that. Usually they do need it because that's, other than the smart people who move into the company, that's all they have, right? And that helps them raise money. And sometimes, maybe quite a bit of the time, as the company continues to develop and iterate and understand more about the opportunities in its market, they may move away from what the university had patented, and they may be able to even terminate their licenses depending on the direction their products move.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Does anybody else want to add anything about patents at this point? So here's another question. This is from Marcus. When and where in the process of technology development did most of you decide that it was worth pursuing a startup? Like Arka said, it was right after they published a paper, might be different for others. And more specifically, what factors did you consider in making the decision to push towards commercialization? It's a pretty big decision. It's going to take up a lot of your time and effort. So what pushed you over the edge? And yeah, go ahead, Arka.
Yeah, I think at least for my case, I know which one is kind of fundamental problem and which is not fundamental problem. And it was very clear that there is no more fundamental problem left to be solved. But there is still a lot of problem to go to product. So I did not want my grad students to work on things which are not really publishable or maybe not that exciting. So that's when I decided to go to startup.
Sorry, because the students wanted to continue to work on it, but you didn't think working on it in an academic setting made sense?
Yeah, I don't think that, yeah, some of the things that, I mean, that's my personal belief, and we can decide what that line is, but that's what, and students also agreed that this doesn't really make sense to do that in the academia.
Yeah. How about you, Claire?
Sure. I think so Matt, Andreas, and I took a look at the technology and realized that the way that it was being used commercially was kind of in a very niche fashion. Millimeter waves were being used for personnel screening, and those companies were creating these really massive, expensive pieces of equipment, and these companies were giant. So we thought that there was a path for us to create kind of a lower cost imaging system. And we were very lucky in that Matt had started a few companies before. So it was kind of a no-brainer when we realized the technology was there, and then we had the people to support it.
Yeah. Josh, you seem to have lots of companies too. So it seems like, pull the trigger, man, make the company. Like, what is it? What's the decision process for you?
Yeah, no, it really wasn't like that. You know, I mean, for me, I think the most important thing is the team, which, you know, that's actually almost a cliche of venture capital and startups. The team is the most important thing, but I think that is really true. You know, when the opportunity to get involved with Proprio came along, you know, I had just started 2 companies, and I thought, oh, you know, this is crazy. Why would I do that? But the reason that I did it was because it was such an incredible team that was coming together. You know, Sam Brad from medicine, who had this sort of medical need, and, you know, my student Jim, and Ken Denman, who's on the UW Foundation board and a successful entrepreneur. So the opportunity to do something with that group was just, you know, so incredible that I thought, you know, I better give us a try. And I think in general that is really the most important thing, because, you know, your business idea might not work out, the technology might not work out, COVID might come along, all kinds of things can change that you have no control over. The only thing is, if you have a great team, they'll figure out something else to do and how to survive that.
Yeah, right. So here's another question, and this is, you know, so for example, the university provides, we have a startup incubator space, there's office space that people can rent, there's lab space that people can rent, there's a variety of other services that the university is providing. So the question is, you know, what does UW provide any initial support for the administrative functions besides that stuff, of companies as they launch, things like, accounting, HR, legal, and so on? Or is that something that's up to the company?
The university, because we are a state entity, cannot provide direct support to companies. That's considered lending the state's credit. So there is a pretty bright line that we can't cross, that there are things we can't do. We can make introductions to accountants and try to help facilitate, but we can't fund that work.
I see. And how does the incubator space work? And how many companies do you have there right now, and that kind of thing?
Oh, that's a great question. We have 2 different incubators. In Fluke Hall, we have some wet lab space and a new hardware incubator space. And in Condon Hall, which is on the other side of campus, the west side, it's more a tech incubator space. So, people who need more desk space, not lab kind of space. I don't know how many companies we are currently incubating, and it's a little bit different because the pandemic definitely changed, who could be physically present and who needed to be physically present. And those are relationships we have with companies, with our startup companies and other companies. You don't have to be affiliated with UW to be in the incubators.
Oh, I see.
And they do pay money to be in the space because we can't lend the state's credit. So there are ways that they provide different kinds of services in exchange for money.
Actually, this is sort of a follow-up question for the rest of the panelists. Where are your companies currently?
Ours is in the Fluke Hall, in the
Incubator space, yeah.
We were in a building on Roosevelt, but we just moved in September to actually an old CrossFit gym right near Works Park. So the gym part is kind of operating as our lab and demo space, and then it has a bunch of office space upstairs.
Interesting.
WiBotic is up at a building near Northgate, just office space that they rent. Proprio has a they've filled up this whole building down in Queen Anne. It's a very cool old loft sort of building. And Jeeva was in, there's a building on 3rd Avenue, which has an incubator in it. Same building Madrona is in. And Jeeva has been in there. They actually moved out during the COVID because they didn't need the space. And I think they're moving back in now.
Here's another really quick question, follow-up question on patents. Which entity, UW, startup, other, is the assignee?
UW.
UW.
UW, yep. Okay, so here's a question that someone asked sort of in an email, I guess, when we were sending out for questions. Tech startups have been criticized for a lack of diversity, typically male-dominated and with a very low representation of underrepresented minorities. What are your thoughts on how we can commit to inviting more diversity in the entrepreneurial and startup world?
Sure, I can start with that one. I think one kind of common thought with people starting a company is, diversity and inclusion is something that I'll consider when my company is larger and more established and has more infrastructure. But I actually think there's steps that you can take kind of from the inception of your company to build it with those values. And one of the easiest is to practice ethical hiring tactics. There's a lot of resources out there in ways that you can structure your job descriptions, structure your interviews in ways that are inviting to underrepresented minorities. There's a lot of great job postings. So that's kind of a good way that you can start your company and not necessarily wait to try to have those values for your company.
Josh?
Yeah, well, so one thing I'll add, which is, one thing I've seen, and this can work against diversity and it can work in favor of diversity, but it seems like there is a lot of positive feedbacks. So, in my lab at UW early on, I had maybe slightly more women than average. And then that led to more women wanting to join my lab. And then, everybody graduated, and now we're, back to probably below average or at average or something like that. And I think, so that means that, as Claire was saying, if you bring in a more diverse group early, that can get amplified. And on the other hand, if you don't, that will also get amplified. So it's not a recipe for success, but it's just an observation that, can steer things in either way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think that there's diversity, equity, and inclusion issues with startups, but it also starts with the people who are inventing the technologies and even being admitted to the university or hired by the university in the first place. So there's a whole very complicated ecosystem that goes all the way through that, right?
And I'll add that we don't have really high quality data because it doesn't exist right now, but we believe that even when we look at female representation in engineering on the faculty, that things that are coming to my office, that we're still seeing an even lower percentage participation from women. And it's become, I think, even a trickier topic because we're even struggling in the office with, is it okay for me to look at Claire and say she's a woman? And I just thought today, it's great because she's got her pronouns on. So she's actually given me permission to say she's a woman, but even that is becoming a challenge. But we know women are participating less. We don't understand why they're participating less. So we're working on trying to make sure that we are welcoming and create a sense of belonging to all of our inventors. And if they want to opt out, because there are some faculty that just are not interested in commercialization, it's kind of, they have an ick factor almost around it. And that's of course fine. But for those who might be opting out because they don't see themselves represented, or, or we worry that they may have a bigger burden of family responsibilities, we're trying to figure out ways to address that. And anybody who has ideas, we'd love to hear them.
Yeah, no, it's an ongoing conversation, and I think that there's so many ways in which we can improve that. It's exciting that people are talking about it more and more and more, though. So I feel like there's a good groundswell right now. We should take advantage of it. One question that, we are running close to the end here, so I wanted to make sure to touch on this. We have a lot of people in the audience who have had various different experiences in corporate world and in startups and in academia and with research and with technology innovation. How can people get involved in the startup scene in the University of Washington community? What kind of relationships have you seen with other people who are trying to give back to the university or get involved in some way? I can say we've, for example, worked with a variety of different mentors who have helped us through the startup world that have been out and sort of come back and returned, to give us advice. But what other ways can people get involved?
I can tell you, for us, we have an entrepreneur in residence, Mike Robinson. I think he did a lot of other startups before. So having this kind of business knowledge, that what works, what not to do, those things are pretty helpful because we don't really know those things at least when you're opening your first company. So yeah.
Entrepreneur in residence program, is that what you were saying?
Yeah.
CoMotion has a pretty robust network of mentors, and the mentors are people with different types of business experience that either just want to give back some of their time or maybe are looking for opportunities. We have a database of them, and our researchers can, peruse that database and look for somebody. I would say the most helpful mentors might be somebody who has enough of a technical background to understand the technology at least a basic level and may be able to think about other kinds of markets, but really can bring in some business skills and perspective, because the university people are experts in the things they are doing, and they need to be complemented with some of those that business knowledge and skill set. So we're happy to chat with anybody who is interested in, volunteering some time to work with university people.
Yeah, that's great. Does anyone have anything else to add to that?
I would say just if there are any industry partners in the audience, we're always looking for kind of new use cases, new partners, new customers. So definitely check out our website and email us if you think you might have kind of a cool use case that we might be able to help you out with.
Yeah, I think that's great. So, and I should add another way that people can get involved with entrepreneurship, at least in the ECE department, is we have the Engine program, which is a capstone engineering program. And every year we get, I don't know, 30, 40 different industry partners to donate money and mentorship to a team of undergraduate students with a faculty advisor to, sort of explore a different product idea. It could be a research question, but more often than not, it's a sort of a technology development question. And it gives our students a lot of exposure to industry and to and sort of real world problems. And you're not just making something, but you're making something that people will use and how people might use it going forward. So that's a great way to get involved as well.
This is Gary. Can I say something?
Sure, Gary.
Hello.
Go ahead.
This is Gary Wong. Somebody can do it just like myself. I'm just crazy about doing things. And so I have my own lab. I have my own invention and everything. That's why I'm able to, whatever I publish or apply, and it's always new because it's a new thing. I do not copy other people's idea or anything. So therefore, I have all this patent. I have the laboratory. I have make all the model and make sure that they are working well. Make sure the idea is okay. Make sure that I can make it cheap. Make sure I can make it perform well and small and so forth. Those things are all, each time I'm completed that thing before I even apply for the patent. The patent is all belong to me, except one with Notre Dame, not with the TRW. And mostly with my sons and my grandsons. So I have all this knowledge, ideas. I wanted to make university to be the number one, university, and I have all the idea, especially right now we are dealing with the 5G. The 5G frequency band
Gary,
is.
I'm gonna cut you off there, but I wonder if maybe you could get in touch with Manaz and Zoe and our advancement team, and maybe Laura, and sort of explore some of these ideas further, because I think we would really value
okay,
more about the ways that you might want to get involved in your experience. So thanks for that. We are running out of time, so I wanted to say sort of do one more round around the panel and just say sort of, why start a company, why get involved, why do one of these things, and then I'll kind of close things up. So what's the motivation for you, I guess, at the end of the day, for what makes this exciting?
So for me, to seeing something that we developed from the scratch to be used in real world, that's like my main motivation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this term is probably overused, but to make something disruptive and new and interesting, and that will really have an impact on the market, that has been really cool.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah, so I think you can think of it in terms of validation of research ideas. You think it's a good idea, but if it's really a good idea, you should be able to, have an impact in the world. I also think creating, a place where people can do more interesting work, additional jobs, essentially, where people can delve deeper into these topics, I think is also a really exciting aspect of this.
Yeah, Laura, did you want to answer that too?
I will offer a comment that one of our startup postdocs made. He said it's like picking the most fascinating lock you've ever picked. That just, it was really mentally very engaging and challenging.
Now, I guess I'll add my own motivation, which is definitely all of those things, but also I think it's a fantastic career path for a student, for a suitably motivated student or postdoc. Some of them, this is their dream, and it's wonderful to have this way that you can be successful in academia and then go on and be successful in an industry setting. So I think doing it for the students is definitely, one of the motivations for me. So this is great. And let's say, if you still have questions, post them in the chat. Maybe the panelists can stick around a little bit, but we're closing in on our time. I want to thank you all for joining us and giving us your perspective on the startups. It's really interesting to see all of the different ways that you guys are working with your startups and with the university. And thanks, Laura, for representing the university side. Thanks the audience for coming to our talk and for asking questions. I want to thank the advancement team for organizing this and reaching out to everybody and collecting everybody together. And for Emily for getting the technical side working and making sure we can all see each other's faces. To continue to stay in touch, I'd like to invite you all to come to our Capstone Engineering Showcase. That's the Engine Showcase. That's on June 3rd and 4th. And so that's the thing where all the students and their industry partners and faculty mentors will show what they've been working on all year for their sort of different product ideas. And it's really interesting. And we've seen those go off in lots of different ways after the university side is over with. So that'll definitely be worth seeing. We'll send you a follow-up email about how you can get involved with that. And what the logistics of logging in and COVID times are to that showcase. Normally it's just a poster session, you show up in person. So look out for that in your email. And I wanted to announce that our next town hall will be this fall. It'll be similar, let's see, will it be in person or will it be on Zoom? We don't know yet. We're trying to figure that out, but we will have a town hall. And the focus is going to be on data science and what the university is doing around data science, machine learning, and AI, and how the electrical and computer engineering department in particular is engaged in that. And we'll have our professor Mariam Fazal, who's also our associate chair for research, will be one of the keynote speakers in that. So with that, I want to thank everybody for their involvement in town hall, and I wish you all well, and I hope you are safe and that you can get back to life as normal as soon as possible. So thank you so much. And like I said, I think the panelists and other people can stick around a little bit more if you want to pop in with questions or post them in the chat. But this ends our formal town hall. So thank you very much. And let's give our panelists a round of applause with your icons or however you do it in the chat and so on.
Everybody, thanks very much.
Oh, thank you.